No one noticed the boy at first, because people rarely notice what they are not expecting to see, and no one expects to see a barefoot child standing outside a crowded downtown theater on a cold evening, clutching a battered old guitar with strings so worn they looked like they might snap if he breathed too hard. Yet if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the way his fingers trembled, not from fear, but from hope, as he waited for the right moment, because this boy, whose name was Eli, had learned very early in life that timing could mean the difference between being ignored and being heard, between hunger and warmth, between despair and the smallest miracle. Eli had no shoes, not because he liked being barefoot, but because life had taken them from him in quiet, cruel ways. First the eviction notice taped to a peeling apartment door, then the night his mother sold the last pair she owned so they could eat, and finally the morning she didn't wake up at all, leaving Eli alone with a guitar that had once belonged to his father, a man who had promised that music could save you if you let it. That night, outside the theater, people streamed past in coats and polished shoes, laughing, checking their phones, talking about the famous audition happening inside, a televised talent competition where judges were known for cutting contestants off mid-note if they weren't impressed fast enough, and Eli knew he wasn't allowed in. Security had already told him so, but he also knew that music didn't care about doors or rules, and when he heard a street performer across the road struggling to be heard over traffic, something inside him stirred, a quiet voice reminding him of nights when his mother would hum softly while counting change, telling him that kindness was just love with its shoes worn out. Eli stepped closer to the theater entrance, sat down on the cold pavement, ignored the sting in his bare feet, and began to play, softly at first, the opening chords of Hotel California, not because it was flashy, but because it was the last song his father had taught him, the one that made his mother close her eyes and smile like the world wasn't so heavy. At first, no one listened. A man dropped a coin without stopping, a woman frowned as if the music were an inconvenience, and a security guard cleared his throat. But then Eli started to sing, and something changed, not in volume, but in truth, because his voice wasn't polished or trained, yet it carried a raw, aching honesty that wrapped itself around every word, as if each lyric had been lived instead of memorized. And when he sang about a dark desert highway, you could hear the long nights he spent walking nowhere. When he sang about a warm smell of colitas, you could feel the memory of a home that once existed. And when he reached the line about being a prisoner of his own device, a woman near the entrance stopped dead in her tracks, because she had spent years chasing success and still felt trapped. Slowly, people began to gather, drawn not by curiosity but by recognition, as if the song were holding up a mirror to pieces of themselves they had forgotten. And inside the theater, through thick walls and closed doors, the sound somehow traveled, slipping through cracks and vents until it reached the judge's lounge, where a veteran musician, famous, wealthy, and quietly exhausted, paused mid-conversation, his hand hovering in the air as he said, "Do you hear that?" Outside, Eli's fingers bled slightly from pressing the strings too hard, but he didn't stop, because he wasn't playing for money or fame. He was playing to stay warm, to stay human, to remind himself that he still belonged somewhere in the world. And when he reached the guitar solo, something extraordinary happened. The city noise seemed to fade, cars slowed, conversations hushed, and even the wind softened, as if the world itself was leaning in to listen. A man in a business suit knelt down and gently placed his scarf around Eli's shoulders, not saying a word. A teenage girl wiped her eyes and live-streamed the moment, her caption reading, "I don't know who this kid is, but he's changing something inside me," and the security guard who had earlier warned Eli away quietly stepped aside, pretending not to notice as the crowd grew. When Eli sang the final lines, his voice cracked, not from weakness, but from memory, of his mother's laughter, of his father's hands guiding his own over the frets, of nights when hunger was loud but love was louder. And when the song ended, there was a silence so deep it felt sacred, followed by applause that wasn't explosive, but reverent, the kind you give when you don't want to break the moment. That was when the theater doors opened, and out stepped the judges, cameras forgotten, scripts abandoned, led by the veteran musician whose eyes were shining as he looked down at the barefoot boy and asked softly, "What's your name?" Eli swallowed and said it, barely above a whisper, expecting nothing, because life had taught him not to expect too much. But what he received instead was a coat draped gently over his shoulders, a pair of shoes placed carefully at his feet, and an invitation, not just to audition, but to be seen. Inside, under bright lights, Eli sang again, but this time it wasn't about proving himself, it was about sharing what he had learned. That pain doesn't disqualify you from beauty, that kindness can arrive in the middle of a song, and that sometimes the most powerful voices come from those who have nothing left to lose. When the episode aired weeks later, millions watched, not just because of the music, but because of the moment a barefoot boy reminded the world that humanity is not measured by what you own, but by what you give. And long after the applause faded, people remembered how it felt to listen, truly listen, and to believe again that even on the coldest nights, a song can open a door where none seemed to exist.